Welcome to The Cutting Edge. This is Chris Benner. I'm your host for tonight. I'm the faculty director of the Institute for Social Transformation, and I come to you once a month, usually on the first Sunday of the month, with interviews with people making a difference in the world. And tonight I want to play excerpts from our recent Right Livelihood Laureate lecture. It's our 11th annual one, and we had three amazing Right Livelihood laureates speaking on women's activism, Indigenous rights, and the environment. So what you'll hear is a conversation, or really excerpts from that conversation, between sociology professor Madhavi Murty and these three Right Livelihood laureates who Madhavi will be introducing, and Madhavi's voice is the first one you'll hear. So here we go.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a privilege to welcome and be in conversation with three formidable women and activists: Joan Carling, a 2024 Right Livelihood laureate; Reema Nanavaty, and Ryoko Shimizu, who are a part of long-standing movements for justice for the historically marginalized, Indigenous peoples, the urban poor, and laborers in informal and unorganized sectors of the economy. They're a part of movements in Asia, led and sustained by women, that have and continue to mobilize for human rights, climate justice, labor rights, and sustainable models of producing that which we need and consume. They're a part of movements sustained by women who have waged enduring fights against the exploitation of land, against brutally extractive processes that have devastated the land and the peoples who are its caretakers, against forced displacement, and against the absence of social security nets for the most marginalized. They, Joan, Reema, and Ryoko, have the weighty and difficult task, therefore, of not only representing themselves, but are also called upon to represent the multitudes of women who sustain these fights. So I want to talk a little bit about each of them and then ask some questions and get this conversation started. So starting with Joan Carling, representing the Indigenous Peoples Rights International, is an Indigenous rights activist from the Philippines who has worked to defend the rights of Indigenous peoples for more than 30 years. Her work spans the local and the global, focusing on human rights, sustainable development, climate justice, and the fight against land exploitation. Her advocacy has had a profound impact, from helping stop destructive mining projects opposed by Indigenous communities to influencing policies on Indigenous women's rights at the United Nations. Carling envisions a world where Indigenous peoples are recognized as vital stewards of the environment and defenders of human rights. She continues to advocate for the protection of Indigenous lands and at the end of criminalization and violence against Indigenous peoples, and the promotion of gender equality within Indigenous communities and the society at large. Reema Nanavaty, representing the Self-Employed Women's Association of India, is a social worker who focuses on women's economic empowerment by building women-owned enterprises and women-led supply chains in energy, agribusiness, food processing, waste recycling, and textiles. As SEVA's General Secretary, she's led efforts to rebuild the lives and livelihoods of earthquake-affected rural women and rehabilitation programs in Afghanistan and Sri Lanka. She helped initiate SEVA's food security program that covers 1 million households and leads the Hariali, or Green Energy and Livelihoods initiative to provide women access to renewable energy. SEVA, which received the Right Livelihood Award alongside its founder Ila Bhatt in 1984, is India's largest trade union for women. It is, in fact, a cooperative union of over 3 million people, 3 million women, mobilized for economic independence and collective organizing. Ryoko Shimizu represents the Seikatsu Club Consumers Cooperative in Japan, where she's been a member for nearly 4 decades. The Seikatsu Club, founded in 1965 with 200 women who bought 300 bottles of milk to get a more affordable price, is now a 500,000 member cooperative union and one of the most successful sustainable models of production and consumption in the industrialized world. So I want to start with the first phrase in the title or the name of the Right Livelihood Conference this year, Women's Activism. I'd love to have each of you discuss, based on your experiences with organizations in the Philippines, in India and Japan, what you think is distinctive and significant about women's organizing and mobilizing. Joanne, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, okay. From my experience as an indigenous activist, it's very clear that indigenous women are at the front line of defending our lands and resources. And they are the peacemakers and peace builders in order to ensure that there is security in our territories. So I want to give an example when at the height of the struggle of tribal communities in my region against large dams, when the companies started to bring the equipment to already put the structure on the river, the women came together and discussed what can they do to stop the men from doing that. That is not seen as aggressive or violent. So what they did was they went to the construction site where there are also soldiers guarding the men doing the construction. And they went there with their shirts and they removed their shirts. And then they said, you men, you need to know where you come from. You come from our breast. And you need to respect that your life come from us. But with what you're doing, you're going to kill us. So the men felt embarrassed. They don't know where to look, right? Because it's all the women showing their breasts. And so they retreated. They retreated. They were feeling embarrassed, right? And so the women dismantled what they were putting in place. So they were successful in stopping that. In another occasion, where there was a history of underground mining that shifted to open pit mining. And I don't know if you've seen open pit, where they practically flatten a mountain, right? With all the machines coming in and out 24 hours a day. So when they've seen that kind of destruction, they said, we will stop that. And you know what they did? Early in the morning, women and children lie down. They lay down where the bulldozers are coming in their numbers, right? More than 100 women and children lying down. So the bulldozers cannot come in because they will have to crush the people, right? So that stopped the mining company and forced them to negotiate with the communities. So that's what I mean when I say indigenous women are in the front line of defending our lands and resources. And the reason for that is for indigenous women, we're with nature, right? And the closest to nature are indigenous women because men, by history, can leave the community. They go to war, for example, or they go and find jobs. But women stay. They stay in the village. They work in the farms. They work in the forest. So anything that happens around them threatens women and their role. So when these are threatened, they have nothing to lose. And they're willing to step up collectively to protect and defend their lands, territories, and resources. So I think that's the distinctness of women. And when we talk of women's activism, it's not just the being frontline, but also using the collective principles and values of women and in fighting this kind of battles. So there's a strong sense of collective action, that the interdependence is there. So we always, indigenous women always act together. They don't see themselves as just individuals. We see ourselves as a collective, and by acting together, can we make a difference. So it's always that relationship of interdependence, mutual cooperation, and solidarity, and caring for each other that also drives Indigenous women's activism, that also drives Indigenous women's movements.
Yes, yeah. I'm very honored to be here, and I feel very nervous because I'm here on behalf of our members. The number of our members is now 420,000. And we started as a buying club of milk. We started in 1965 by 200 housewives. And those housewives started their collective buying because they want to change their society from the grassroots level. Because at that time, most women stayed at home, taking care of the family, taking care of their kids, and men went to work to the cities. And our members, those 200 members were highly educated, but they didn't have a place to have their own say. So they started their own group to have their voices heard. And yeah, they started as a buying club of food, and they wanted to change their lifestyle at the grassroots level in their community. And they, all the time, they created what they really need in the society, in their local community. That is why, as she said, they started daycare centers or nursing home for elderlies. Now, majority of women work outside home, but still, those our members. I forgot to say that our organization is a consumers cooperative, and consumers cooperative means that consumers own our cooperative. And I am an employee of the Seikatsu Club Consumers Cooperative, so I am employed by our great members. Yeah, in a sense, Seikatsu Club was a kind of school for learning democracy. So members get together and decide everything on their own. And each member have one vote. One member have one vote. So I think it was a very great way to empower women. So yeah, it is still the same. Yeah, even though many people work outside home, they are very active in the local areas, and they know the needs of the local community. So that is why they are still very active and creating many good, new things until now. Thank you.
Namaste. As Sister Ryoko said, I speak here on behalf of our 3.2 million members, all women workers in the informal economy in our country. And 93% of the workforce in our country is in the informal sector. And so it's the 7% formal sector that has yet to learn how to partner and work with the informal sector. And I think in a country like ours, therefore, where there's surplus of labor and less of employment opportunities, how do you create alternative opportunities so that the poor can live a life of dignity and self-respect? And that is why organizing becomes a key. Organizing is the surest way. That is what our 5 decades of experience shows. It's the surest way to fight poverty. And we come together as poor, as women, and as workers, no matter what caste, community, or religion we belong to. We come together, we organize to build our collective strength in our fight against poverty. We're not here to fight a government or a contractor or a trader, but how do you fight poverty? By building your collective strength, by increasing your bargaining power, and earn a life of dignity and self-respect. Then I want to give you some examples of how a joint action of struggle and development. The wives of the textile mill workers from where Seva was founded were all in the informal sector, either selling old clothes on the the streets, or vegetables, or working as head loaders in the textile market. And they were either seen as obstructing the traffic or, as encroachers by the municipal authorities and by the police. And these women needed small credit to continue doing their business. And there were no banks which were willing to give this small credit of, $1 or $2 that they needed, which is 50 rupees or 100 rupees a day. And in our very second year of organizing, these women said that, why can't we have a bank of our own? And how can poor women who do not even have work security and income security have a bank? And one of our old clothes seller, she got up and she said, yeah, we are all poor, but we are so many. And if we all would contribute, and that is how we can have a bank of our own. And so the first principle that we always now follow at Seva is that poor do not want charity. What they need is an enabling environment that equips and enables them to fight poverty. And so each member of Seva contributed 10 rupees as a share, and they bought a share of 10 rupees. It was a huge struggle. It took us almost 2 years to register a bank of the poor. But that was the world's first ever microfinance institution. Which is a full-fledged registered cooperative bank, which today has 300,000 shareholders. But the second principle we learned, therefore, is organizing is a slow process. It has to be at the pace of the poor women. And that is what I think a lot of policymakers and development organizations and donors do not understand. They want to fit them into a project cycle where you want short-term gains and results. But if you want the ownership, if you want the organization to be rooted amongst the communities, it has to be at the pace of the women themselves. And I would just end by giving one last example, and that is that organizing brings together women. Very often they are small farm holders. They do not have access to the market directly. They have to rely on. But when they come together, it gives them that confidence that if she's able to change her life and destiny, so can I. And that's how women then come up to adopt new tools and technologies. So we have poorest of the poor women who now use solar pumps, an investment which is beyond their capacity. But, they feel that, oh, this technology can really help address their issue. And so they took a big loan from the bank. The banks also were willing to give the loan because, it was not one or two women, but thousands of women. And this was their own organization. And then they acquire green skills, because if you have thousands of pumps in a desert, you do need mechanics, because machines can create wonders, but they break down too. And that's how you have your own climate school. And that's why we say that we are poor, but we are so many. And that's where women are futuristic, and they are the ones we are very hopeful will bring about the change. Thank you.
So, I wondered if Joan and Ryoko, you want to elaborate too on how your organizations, how the women, in your in the cooperatives and in the organizations you're a part of, are thinking about climate justice and what form that has taken.
Yeah. Okay. From the indigenous perspective, indigenous peoples. We are 446 million all over the world, which is 6% of the global population. 20% of the land mass is our customary land that we have been protecting throughout centuries, which is also a subject of control by governments and corporations, and that is also including in the issue of climate change. So, and in spite of the colonization and assimilation, we are still persisting to protect and conserve 60 to 80% of the remaining biodiversity. But at the same time, while we are 6% of the global population, 30% of those killed for protecting the environment and human rights are from indigenous peoples, 30%. So we're facing a lot of risk and facing even, killings for what we do in protecting nature. So when we talk of climate justice now, there are two things that figures out strongly in relation to indigenous peoples. One is that we have the least carbon footprint, but we are suffering the most, living in the most fragile ecosystems that are impacted by climate change. You see droughts, flooding, sea rise. These are happening in indigenous territories. And even in that context that we have the least carbon footprint, yet we are contributing the most. We are the ones protecting the forest, for example, but we are regarded as destroyers of the forest. And in order to protect the forest in the name of climate change, to prevent carbon emission, we are kicked out of the forest. Is that climate justice? Right? The ones protecting the forest for everybody else, the ones protecting the ecosystem, is being punished in the name of conservation. So that's one side. The other side is that we also see ourselves as victim of the solutions, like the just transition. The just transition has two components, right? The creation of renewable energy, like solar farms, windmills, geothermal, even hydro dams on one side. And in order to continue to build e-cars and solar plates, they need to do mining of critical minerals. And where is that critical minerals coming from? More than 50% is in indigenous territories or around indigenous territories. So, with the history of mining in indigenous territories, where we are not part of the decision making, we don't give consent, we receive all the toxic waste, the destruction of the environment, the destruction of our livelihoods, the destruction of our culture, the destruction of our sustainable ways of life. That's going to happen all over, again in the name of climate solution, in the name of climate change. We've seen the imposition of renewable energy like windmills in indigenous territories that were opposed by indigenous peoples, and yet governments insist. And that is causing the destruction of our livelihoods. So when we talk of climate justice, we need to make sure that our rights to our lands, territories, and resources is fully and legally recognized and protected, that the principle of sustainability and social equity needs to be in place, not just in rhetoric, not just in words, but in clear action and commitment.
And as a last question, what gives you hope in this moment? And I think that's a good way to conclude our discussion here.
What is hope? Yes, yeah. I think my hope is that I'm surrounded by very motivated women who wants to change our society. And we are, as I said, we are based on democracy. Each person has the equal power. So yeah, I think I'm lucky to be in this environment. Yeah, so otherwise, yeah, the society is now, yeah, we have a lot of discouraging, depressing things. But now, I'm now surrounded by like-minded people, and yeah, that makes me hope.
What gives me hope are the young youth and the women. And I have experienced and stood with our members in so many of their struggles and challenges. And that has given me the needed strength and courage to continue organizing these women for almost 4 decades now. And I think it's the poor women who are, in spite of their so many struggles and challenges, are always willing to take on newer risks in their lives. And it's all because of hope. They are always optimistic that, things will change. And therefore, at Seva, we never call it as a failure. We call it as our constructive struggle. You never give up. You learn from the mistake, you analyze, reflect, and move on. And that's why I think we always believe that we shall overcome.
Yeah, for me, it's the indigenous communities that, in spite of all the attacks, in spite of all the land grabbing, in spite of all the difficulties that they're facing, they're fighting back. They're fighting back. And for me, that's hope. We've been fighting for centuries, and we've never given up. That's why we're here. We're still here trying to make our dignity intact. And I think a lot of us, like I said earlier, each of us can contribute in making the change. It's a choice that we make, whether we want to be part of the change or not. But I believe that each of us can contribute, and that gives me hope that every one of us can make a change. And if we do that, just imagine how we can change in spite of what's happening in this country. I really empathize with you, and I do give my sincere solidarity. But we can act together. Don't also think that you're alone. You have the support of peoples in the world. And I think this is the time that we need to be together. We need to care for each other. No matter what, we stand by together. And that, I think, is the hope we have. Thank you.
That's all we have time for tonight. You've been listening to excerpts from the 11th Annual Right Livelihood Laureate Lecture with Joan Carling, Ryoko Shimizu, and Reema Nanavaty in conversation with Madhavi Murty. The full 1.5-hour event recording is on the Right Livelihood website, rightlivelihood.ucsc.edu. You've been listening to The Cutting Edge on KSQD 90.7.